All right, it's time now for our call of the day, and today we are talking about Deutsche Bank's latest on shares of Disney. The firm is upgrading the stock, to buy, raising its price target on Disney to $163 per share. Now, I think we are all well familiar with what's happening in Disney World, I guess we should say, to use a bad pun there. Over the last couple of years, right, it's all about the D2C, Disney Plus, big weekend for that. I'm sure we'll get into it with Mulan and all of that. But Dan Roberts here, I think it's interesting to see Deutsche Bank call this the land grab phase of D2C, because I feel like that is an acknowledgement that they agree with your thesis of there will only be so many winners. You can't have too many streaming services. There will have to be some kind of consolidation or normalizing in the market. And Deutsche Bank here is essentially just saying Disney has won their amount of territory and they will never be giving that back.
Well, yeah. And by the way, that isn't only my thesis. I mean, as you sort of alluded to, this note mentions that Disney is all in on streaming, and it sort of is written as though that's news. I mean, Disney was already all in on streaming. And in fact, I remember when we wrote over a year and a half ago when ESPN Plus had just launched and there was no Disney Plus yet, the name wasn't even out there, when Bob Iger said on an earnings call that DTC is now the number one priority at the company. And I remember writing that up because that was the first time we heard that. Well, now it's very obvious. I mean, that's the future and where everything is headed. By the way, I'm sure we'll get into this more later on in the show, but there is just quickly an irony in talking about a bullish note on Disney today, as the reviews of Mulan are very bad. Very bad. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that from Melody Hom, who watched it. I have not watched it. But it's interesting also that this note mentions the fact that it's still a possibility Disney could eventually spin off the media networks, ABC and ESPN, because that almost contradicts the thesis that Disney is doing DTC very well. Because even though the glitz and the glam, when we talk about Disney's DTC, is first Disney Plus, and then arguably second Hulu, which it now majority owns, then there's ESPN Plus. And so it's interesting to me to, in the same note, say that, you know, it's going all in on DTC. It looks very smart in that regard, but also it could just sell off ESPN. Well, which is it? And ESPN Plus still growing kind of slowly but surely. It has been a little gradual, not sort of the exciting, sexy rocket growth of Disney Plus. But look, Mulan is going to be a really interesting first litmus test because of that charge to own it, to have digital ownership. And apparently, if you can just wait till December, then you don't have to pay an extra fee for it. And unfortunately, based on the reviews, I think that might end up being a problem. I think a lot of people will wait to December, but we'll see. And lastly, I should mention that Sensor Tower just shared with Yahoo Finance data that suggests that over the holiday weekend, so 4 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, there was about $15.3 million of in-app spending through Disney Plus. But let's make sure we caveat, that doesn't mean $15 million worth of $30 Mulan fees. That can include a lot of people who are signing up for the subscription in the first place and had to sign up first and then also pay for Mulan. So, you know, with the streaming thing, and we talk about this a lot, but it's just really hard to get a standardized set of numbers on which to judge a streaming original movie release. You know, we know this with Netflix too, where it picks and chooses and selectively says, look how many people watch this awful Adam Sandler murder mystery movie. Well, sure, but they don't share those numbers always. They only share them when it's a big success. So hard to really judge at this point, but I guess my reaction to the note is, yeah, we knew this. We knew that Disney sees where the puck is headed and is prioritizing streaming now.
Yeah, Dan, to your point, lots of cherry picking here, and that's still allowed, right, when it comes to the streaming world, because there's no standardized infrastructure. And a friend of the program, Jason Reed, on Friday, who is a producer of Mulan, kind of echoed that sentiment. I do have to say, you asked for it. Mulan was pretty bad. And in general, I would say I am like the demographic that would have liked it if it were decent, just because of the nostalgia play. But the cartoon came out, as we know, in 98. 22 years later, this was a massive disappointment. There was very little character development. You felt no attachment to Mulan. You didn't really sense that father-daughter relationship that basically is the crux of the movie. And she's doing it as sort of a tribute, this filial sort of responsibility. There was none of that buildup. I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but there was no Mushu. There's no music. There was none of the sort of beautiful elements that really made Mulan and sort of the Disney magic that you can sort of expect as a base level when you watch a Disney movie. So yeah, this note is not that interesting to me, just because top of mind for me is that Mulan was a very massive disappointment. And I do need to know, right? Jason Reed, who was on, he's a producer. He is a very accomplished white man who was a Disney exec. The director of this film is also a white woman, and most of the writers on this film were white people as well. So just to give you a sense of how little has changed in terms of the kind of behind the scenes point of view and the lens and the narrative, unfortunately, it didn't feel very authentically Asian in many ways as well. So just wanted to point it out.
Well, I guess that brings up the question, though, which we talk about with Disney all the time. I think we talk about this with content in general, which is that does it matter if Mulan wasn't good for Disney's ambitions? And I mean it this way, where there's an inevitability about their tentpole, whether it's the, I don't know, Dan, correct me. They have the Marvel, right? Disney owns all the Marvel guys. Is that correct?
Yes.
I see you nodding. Yes. So they have all their tentpole films, right? And they roll them out every so often. I mean, think about the new Lion King, a movie that also stunk, but did fine because there's this sense that, well, no matter what, it's fine for Disney. And so I do wonder, Melody, like how much it matters to them. And I think some people call Mulan soulless, right? How much it matters to them for these movies to come out. And it's like, yes, well, it furthers the strategy, so it's fine.
Well, Miles, I have to push back on that because Disney recognizes the need to actually invest more in the proper, authentic storytelling because they've gotten so much. It's 2020. There's so much backlash. It's almost understandable 20 years ago when there are a lot of these inappropriate cultural appropriation. You're not quite sure what the storyline is. Take, for example, Aladdin. Actually, leading up to Aladdin, I actually know someone who was hired specifically to form the Disney diversity team to actually run through all second by second, scene by scene, to see how the Middle East would respond. And the Middle East still responded poorly based on the kind of depiction of Arabian Nights, etc. And I imagine the same is happening with this film. I have to say, even as a child, which is sort of the demo you should count on for a Disney movie, I would be bored watching Mulan. Like the first 30 minutes, I don't think a kid's interest would be piqued or sustained. And this might seem harsh. I'm curious to hear when somebody else watches it on our programming to kind of combat me here or come up with a counterpoint. But I can tell you firsthand, if I were 10 years old, I would not find this movie entertaining by any means. And Dan, I know you mentioned this earlier, but just thinking about it as, the producer saying that they don't want this to be an action film. It's more about the emotional connection, but there was neither. So I'm not quite sure where the trajectory is from here. But I guess, Miles, to circle back to your original point, I guess it doesn't matter. But for me, I wish it did matter.
Well, and guys, I'm actually with Melody in the sense that I wouldn't say it doesn't matter because Disney's recent string of live action remakes were all such mega hits. Aladdin, The Lion King, and long before that, Jungle Book, which I believe was through a different part of Disney, maybe Disney Animation or something. It was all computerized, but that was the only one I thought was very good. But all three of those live-action remakes of classic animated movies did more than $1 billion at the box office. They were just huge. And of course, with Mulan, we can never know what it would have done with a normal, non-pandemic theatrical release. Maybe it would have done huge numbers anyway, despite the bad reviews. But I do think now it just goes to show, or at least the story in hindsight, even once we're through the pandemic, is going to be that these Disney live-action remakes are no longer seen as guaranteed, bona fide, automatic box office gold after Mulan. And again, I've mentioned this, but it's going to be so interesting to see in what way Disney spins and promotes the numbers to try to say, look, it was a big hit. And we should give the caveat, it's still going out in theaters outside the US in many markets. So it's a hybrid model. We'll see how it does. But, hard to now say, anything Disney does. I mean, for a while there in 2018 and 2019, the Marvel movies were all huge, huge cash cows. Then the Star Wars, Lucasfilm movies. And suddenly it was like, gosh, everything that does well at the box office is Disney. Well, Mulan, not so much as of now, but we'll see in a week or two.